welcome back to another episode of the Pro Series podcast. This is episode 71 with Andrew Suvalsky. Andrew is an architect based out of New York, and he is the owner of Andrew Suvalsky Designs, ASD. He specializes in fine interiors and interior architectural renovations and so much more. He's been published in pretty much every publication out there. He's been on HGTV, Oxygen, Fox, NBC's Open House, and more. He tells me all about how he got into the business, why he loves interiors, and so much more. But before we get into this episode, please make sure you like, subscribe, and review this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I hope you enjoy episode 71 with Andrew Suvalsky. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today. Excited to talk to you about your design career and life in New York.
How is life? You know what? You actually cut out in that 1 second, so I didn't hear the full question. I heard something in New York.
Thank you so much for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you about design and your life in New York.
Okay, great. Happy to be here. Happy to share, what's going on over here in New York and then with my work and have a fun time with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a Pro Series, I started it out. I did it kind of to create more content for social media, but also selfishly, I like to talk to people that are like-minded myself, like anybody in construction, design, real estate agents. And you came across, I think, my featured page on Instagram and saw some of your work and how you were published in so many different magazines and stuff, which we'll talk about. But I kind of want to jump in and talk about like how you got started in the design field. Was that always something that you were interested in growing up, or did you do something when you were younger that kind of sparked that interest?
Great question, because for me, it hits right to the center of why I do, I guess, what I do. Always, little boy, loved anything to do with building houses, particularly how I like big buildings too, and I like bridges because I remember I used to like want erector sets and things like that, which were toys when I was a kid. But I was mostly just like really fixated on houses, just houses. And I used to draw, kind of figured out, I guess, I don't remember how, maybe looking at some books or something, like what architectural plans looked like. And I used to love to draw. I'd sit up at night and just make up houses and start drawing rooms and try to imitate, use my imagination. And I have this memory, two memories, when I was very, very young, super young. And I remember sitting in the front yard playing, maybe my mom sent me just out to play. And I was really little. And we used to have these little wood chips around the tree. They're like decorative wood chips in landscaping. And I remember taking taking the little wood chips and pretending like I was building a little subdivision of houses and pretended they were houses. And then another one is more on the design decorating side, which is related, of course, but a little different than just drawing house plans. I was really, really little. I remember being on my aunt's back patio, like almost like like a screened-in porch, and she had, I don't know, probably not much furniture, but as a little kid, it seemed like a lot of furniture to me. And I kind of instinctively, she let me started dragging the furniture around into different arrangements, kind of like how I thought.
Okay.
Yes. Thought it would make the space feel better, look better, more logically, whatever. So I definitely had this propensity, this desire to create space, residential space. I'm using terms that I use now. I didn't think of that as a kid. I just, and I used to like really be fascinated. We grew up in a perfectly nice house, what's called a ranch house.
Yeah.
Floor, nice, nice, pleasant. But not so far away, there was an area of much larger, more, really like historically special mansions. So we drive on this road, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So this one street along the lake, because Milwaukee's on the lake, called Lake Drive, and you just see one big mansion after the other. And really, to this day, when I go home, if I don't take a ride up and down Lake Drive, my visit home is incomplete. And I would dream about like, well, what do those houses look like inside? Because I knew they didn't look anything like my house, and so I was just fascinated by anything to do with houses, the different styles, imagining what could be inside. I try, and that's, however I could get my hand in that was sort of a goal. I thought I'd be an architect, so I was focused more on in building houses and what that was about. But ultimately, the university kind of directed me and brought me to ultimately to what I do for a living today and have for a number of years.
So that fascination growing up, did you have anything in your high school or anything that allowed you to explore that in a different way than just on your own, like architectural drawing classes or anything?
Yeah, no, no. In
No.
fact,
Okay.
here's interesting. I remember between eighth grade and high school, I remember signing up for classes in advance of, I guess, fall semester of my freshman year, and I signed up for a drafting class. I wanted to, and then like last minute, I distinctly remember getting a call from the minute one of the people who are in charge of these things. They said, "Well, this class is canceled. There weren't enough people signing up." So I had to on the fly randomly pick another class to fit into that slot, which turned out to be typing,
Uh,
which but
you still
I'm
use
actually
it?
kind of I used it. I used it in college. I made extra money typing papers for people, so that worked out okay. It wasn't a problem. I'm glad I'm a fast, good typist. But I remember just thinking I was like really disappointed because I was going to take a drafting class, and no. So the answer to your question is no. I practiced on my own. I used to, like I said earlier, as a kid, really like just was always fascinated with drawing and house plans. So I remember like I don't know, 10 years old or something, 11. I'd go to the library, and they used to have, and you can still find them on like Pinterest, just more out of interest. They had in the back of certain magazines, I don't remember which ones, these house plans and renderings of the house that were for sale. Like a person could send away and get the plans. But what I loved was the way they did the renderings, or the I guess the promotional presentation of not just the floor plan, but what the house would look like with these really great architectural pencil drawings and landscaping. And every house they made look like just so glamorous and big, and the way, the perspective they used. So I loved all of that. I just loved, to this day, it's like looking at, if I go on Pinterest late at night or whatever, and I'll look up like, house plans from the 1970s or 1960s, even older than me, but just of that era that I might be interested in that moment. And you see how they represented them, the whole mystique around them. I love that.
Yeah.
I find it for fun and interesting.
Yeah. It's funny saying that, like you saying that to me sounds normal because I love that stuff too. But if you say that to anybody outside the design world, they're like, you're such a nerd, or you're like, what is wrong with you? You like to do that. But I'm the same way. I love looking up at like how much floor plans have changed over the years and the flow of homes. And it's just so interesting.
It is. It really is. Yeah, it's like a window into what people of a certain era valued, for sure. Like how they divided space up says a lot about how they presented in the world. And if they, like for instance, if you look at a lot of older house plans, they would have like always like a his and her closet,
Yeah.
and more everything. This changed in the 60s, which I liked. It was really cool. But like a little older than that, everything was more partitioned. It was more like about privacy, and kitchens weren't open. And they, even not that big of houses often had like a little small bedroom off to the, like near the laundry room. That would be called like the maid's quarters or something, like this idea of like that there was help and there was not help, and that there was men and women were very separated in certain regards, which we still are, but not the same, obviously. So you can see that in these house plans, and you can even probably track an evolution by looking at like different eras and how it changed.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny how things change. Like now, how kitchens are like the heart of the home, and before kitchens were a closed off room and kind of something that you ultimately hid, or had a cook in there, or it just wasn't the heart of the home like it is now.
No, not the shared space. No, definitely not.
Yeah.
That's just quick sidebar. Like we recently moved. I and my I have twins are 4.5, and
Okay.
my husband, we moved out of the city, not in New York City. We moved to the suburbs, with this, we want to give our kids more space and all the exact reasons you think: basement, backyard, the whole thing. So we got a great house, which we love, mid-century. And when I bought it, I then proceeded to nearly gut it, kind of to overcome a lot of the things that we're just describing. It
Mm.
had all the right overall space. I could see the potential, but it had, this kitchen was very separate from the dining room, and there was a door, but that's it. It was like you couldn't see through it. It wasn't meant to be a shared experience. Even the entrance to the kitchen from the foyer felt like the opening to a closet. It was just very small, and that's just how they decided to build things. But when I knocked on all these walls, I'm like, all of a sudden the same house didn't change the exterior walls. We didn't do an addition. It just, we changed the space inside. And all of a sudden the house got much bigger. I mean, to my way of thinking, and much more akin to the way I live my life. But as you said, this is not how they did it. It's not how they did, unless you were very progressive and were forward thinking and wanted to break the mold. By and large, houses were designed, for a very different kind of lifestyle.
Absolutely. So when you left high school, you went to college, I think you
Yep.
mentioned. Did you go for interior design?
Nope, not at all. I went for architecture. I was always
Okay.
like, if we're going to talk about the interior design, I knew interior design was a thing. Back then, they just called them interior decorators. It never occurred to me, and it's interesting because now looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, I was very attuned to it. I just didn't have an obvious reference to what that was as a career.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly not in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was it common to have, maybe people had some decorators or something, but nothing, people had nice houses, certainly, but I didn't think in those terms. I remember watching a show that's, I'm old enough to remember it well. I'm sure people know the Brady Bunch, and the father was an architect. Like, that was more like discernible to me. I understood architecture. Like I said, I used to love to draw architectural plans. I do remember always having an interest in what houses look like. I just didn't connect it to a career. Architecture, I understood as a career. So I pursued architecture in undergrad. I got an BA in architecture.
Yeah. And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because interior design still, it's very blurred on the meaning of it. For most people, like if you're in the industry now, you understand what interior design is, but people outside the industry, it's a very blurred definition of what an interior designer does. Most people just think it's decorating, then house plans and all the engineering and all that stuff that comes along with it. But yeah, it's funny how you said that, because I was the same way. I didn't know interior design is what I liked the most. I thought it was always architecture.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you didn't have that, listen, I think everybody knows that they need an architect. If you're going to build a building, you need an architect. I don't think anybody thinks they can. Very few people think they could, so to speak, sidestep that and just go right to the contractor. Some people do that with small renovations. They figure they don't need a middleman. They'll articulate what they want, and that, for better or worse. But most people think they need an architect at a certain level. Many people don't think in terms of interior design as much of a necessity. Whether it's a necessity or not is debatable, but if you want the space to come alive, and most good architects love to work with a good designer, interior designer, because they understand that there's only so far as the architect they're going to take the interior, but there's a whole level of detail and articulation, which is even before furniture, right? Furniture falls into that basket of interior design, but so do, bathroom and kitchen design often, and all the finishes, and not just what colors the finishes are, but the textures and how they all interrelate. And so that symbiosis is apparent to me. It's definitely apparent to my clients, but it's not necessarily apparent to everybody. And I think what's nice for our industry, the interior design industry, is increasingly people understand the value of the interior design aspect. If you really care about your space, building the walls and the roof is important, but there's so much more you can do to really enjoy and benefit from the space.
Exactly. I cannot tell you who told me this, but it was like design and architects are kind of like a doctor in a surgical room. Like they need like they could do what the nurses are doing, but they can't get the job done get the job done successfully without the surgery techs and the nurses and everybody else in that room to get the job done successfully. It's just like an architect or an engineer with designers and kitchen and bath designers as well.
Yeah, for sure. We recently, one of my projects, we designed a stair, like really a connection between. We connected two apartments, a penthouse and the one below. There was a breakthrough through the slab. We created this floating glass stair, and I didn't know the first thing about how to build a stair, but I knew how to design something I liked the look of, and I understood the spatial aspect of it. But from the engineering standpoint, I knew nothing, and I don't profess to know, because that's not my area of expertise. So we worked with an engineer who really was, obviously instrumental into making sure the stairs worked and the loads worked. But what I really, one of the things I really enjoyed about the process is you get 2 or 3 entities together who know what they're doing and talking the same language. They bring in this essential piece of information. The one can't really do the other, their work without the other, vice versa. And we got this incredible feature piece that I never had done a stair before. And it's a little daunting at first because you really right out of the gate have to be thinking about things that you don't quite as much in certain other aspects of interior design. But I think that also, for me, that comes from that architectural background that I have. That is, I'm as interested in how something looks as how it's made to exist in this world, how it's built, how it fits in, how, what those circumstances around that, how they matter to whether or not I can actually just even suggest the item in the first place. I can't suggest we do something unless I know it can be built. Whereas maybe some other designers are more thinking, well, this is a pretty or an attractive item. They'll bring it into the design and then they'll sort of worry about the details later. I kind of concern myself maybe overly so early on with how it all gets made and built and structured and everything else.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, I feel like a lot of people fall into that mistake early on in their career just because, you don't know as much, but you're also so excited and you want to, you over design stuff and promise stuff that you don't exactly know it's going to be able to be come to your vision and is actually possible. But
Yeah.
glad you said that. That makes a lot of the young designers that listen to this need to know it's okay to ask for help. And like you went to the engineer. How did you so you started your own business. When did that start out? And did you start right out of school or did you work for a firm?
Yeah, so I have to this day, I think an interesting story because a little bit was kismet, it was something beyond the obvious, I think. So graduated college, went to grad school, pursued another degree in architecture. And I was also contemplating that I didn't think I wanted to be an architect at that point because I wasn't yet connecting architecture to the part of that I really was most stoked by, which turned out to be interior design. I didn't even have a word for it. So I'm like, well, I thought I don't want to become an architect who's going to be working on big buildings and doing drawing doorknobs all day, like at an entry level. There was so I had this idea that I'd be pigeonholed and I didn't know about going into residential interior architecture or design, or interior architecture, much less design. So get this degree, I added urban planning to my degree because I thought, well, that's something maybe more practical that I could get a job in. I didn't really, looking back, probably was broadly interested in urban planning, but it was a joint degree at the grad school of Wisconsin that I went to, University of Wisconsin. So I graduated there, get a job in urban planning, not architecture. Did my thing there. It was for a municipality outside of Chicago, a suburb. Interestingly, the suburb was a very, very affluent area with a lot of historic homes. So I was already getting sort of like involved a little bit because I worked for the building review board, which was design related. I worked for the planning commission and the zoning board of appeals, all of which were dealing with these houses. And some of them were quite incredible, important houses. So wasn't decorating them, but I was still having some view into them and what that was about. But I still found myself not fulfilled after, let's say, 3 years there, still in my early 20s. I then kind of freelanced for a couple more years while I was in Chicago, working in a way that was related to my background, but not feeling like I was on a career path directly. And I had really wanted to move to New York. By my mid to late 20s, I was really bent on moving. I had been to New York quite a lot in college because I went to school closer here, but I felt that pull that certain people have to go to New York, whether it's for performing arts or finance, or whatever. I'm going to be creative in New York. That's literally what I thought. But wasn't sure what the job would be and how to get me there other than, getting a plane ticket to go just move to New York. But without getting too many details, I kind of just started looking for jobs remotely because I was in Chicago, and got a job completely by chance for a very, very esteemed interior designer. And I didn't really realize what I had stepped into as much as I thought, well, this is just going to be a job to get me to New York. He hired me as his personal assistant, basically. And I didn't even really know what that was, but I said, I'll take it. Thought it was a job, get me to New York. So I get there. This is quite a long time ago at this point. And I get to New York and start with him. I remember arriving at LaGuardia Airport on a Sunday night. I call him from a payphone. Tells you how long ago it is. I had a cell phone, but I don't think it had connected yet in New York. So, basic technology. I called him. I said, I'm here. I'll be at the office tomorrow, as promised, And in a way, that's like right out the bat. I got to the office. It was in Soho, which is a fun, great area to be in an office. And it didn't take but a few days, I think, before I kind of just felt at home with what they were talking about, what the other staff were talking about, and he gave me some responsibilities out of the gate that were probably not what he intended, but he saw that I was hungry and desired to be in the mix. Let me start to manage small projects, things like that. Was not at all long before I felt very integrated into what this designer was doing in terms of his product, which was very, very high-end residential. He had a lot of famous clients. We had spectacular properties in New York that I was right out of the, again, not anticipating this was my career move. I just still thought I was going to New York to figure out. Things got good, and I went to him after a short while and I said, well, I'd like to stay here. I'd like the job. I'm glad you give me more responsibilities. Can I have a raise? Because I thought I can't really live on what he was paying me. And he said something to me at the time, which turned out to be a good thing. He said, no. He said, no, I won't give you a raise yet. But if you want to take clients on your own, if they come your way, you can do so. And that would oftentimes designers don't promote that with their staff for good reason or understandable reasons. And I thought, well, I'm new to New York. Who's going to hire me? Like, why would anybody call me? Nobody knows that I'm in this industry. I barely know I'm in this industry. Yeah. And just wouldn't you know that day I got a call from a friend, maybe it was an email from a friend in Chicago. And he says, hey, Andy, I know you're working in interior design. I have a friend in New York who needs help. Do you think you could help him? So then I got my first client, so I started with this one rogue first client, and I was working at my firm that I described, getting this amazing exposure and learning things in real time that I suppose you learn in school, and a lot of stuff that you don't learn in school had I gone to interior design program. And it all fell into place. I was there for 6 years and was really just saw and did so much from the design side, from the financial side, to really, he let me, this employer, wonderful guy, supportive of me and I of him to this day. And after 6 years, he said, took me to lunch. He said, I'll never fire you, but don't you think it's time you leave? He's like, you should go on your own. Had a lot of work already on my own, and I was down to 4 out of 5 days a week for him, still holding up my end of the bargain. But I think I was very devoted to him and maybe a little intimidated in theory to go out on my own, but just had to hear that from him unsolicited. And I left him and then really launched my company. So, I've been doing this for 20 plus years at this point as we speak today. But my business I've had for about 16 years, and that coincides when I left my prior employer. His name is Benjamin. And so I got this great kind of thrust into this industry that I liked, that I was good at, that I felt affinity for. Yeah. And let's face it, New York is the place. I'm not saying you can't, there's great design all over this world now, especially more than ever. But I think in many ways, people still feel New York is the epicenter for a million reasons. I mean, it's like, if interior design isn't a necessity for most people, a lot of people in New York feel for them it is,
Yeah.
Spend so much money on their apartments, on, really just outsized amounts, because that's the market. And I think people expect, if they're going to spend that much on their apartment to begin with, they want what they want,
Yeah, they want to look good, yeah.
And those that can. So that's more or less my trajectory of how I got into interior design in a way that was not anticipated. Like I said, didn't go to school for it. Didn't think that it was even really much of an industry, didn't understand it as an industry, and turned out to be great.
Yeah. If you think if he didn't sit you down and have that talk, would you still be working with him, or how much longer would it have taken you to go out on your own?
Yeah, not much, probably.
Not much.
That was really, I had some significant projects by then, relatively. Since of course grown further quite a bit. But I think that I just needed somebody to. I had a friend, also a very good friend of mine. We're very close to this day. And we had different careers, but kind of paralleled each other, worked for somebody, was, raised in the ranks under that person who was successful in their own right. And then he had just gone on his own. I remember him also saying, he's like, you got to go, you got to like make the break. I'm a very devoted person. So, that probably kept me, thought, well, if I can do both, then that's fine. Maybe I wasn't giving myself enough credit that I shouldn't really, so I certainly would not be with him today, whether it would have changed, 6 months, within 6 months of that conversation, or a year. It's hard to say now, but I think that I would have definitely found something would have triggered me to leave.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
when you started your business, I see that you were featured in many things like New York Times and Architectural Digest. And I think we talked a little bit off camera about, designers wanting to be a part of have their projects featured in their magazines or online websites and stuff. What do you give them for advice on how to get that ball rolling and get featured in those magazines?
It's a very good question, because I think there are different ways for it to happen. The one thing I would say now is that it's a very, very crowded field. I think it was less so in the past. There was more print magazines, so the desire, most designers I know want the exposure, because it's a big difference between editorial exposure, which means you're being featured and your work is good enough that they want to grace the pages of their website or their magazine,
Mm-hmm.
versus if there's nothing wrong with this, but like if you put on an ad, you're paying for your exposure, right? That's completely that is completely the expected and acceptable model in almost every other industry. But when it comes to design, because I guess it's more of an art, it's just sort of your art should ascend on its own. So how do you really get it noticed is the question, right? So for me, when I first started, I've always wanted the exposure. And I used to just blindly submit some work and even not submit, and I got attention early on. Mm-hmm. I consider it as luck, is what I'd say. I mean, I think I had good work. I do. I'm not being like shy to say that I think it was, a good choice on the part of the magazine, but we're talking the first round. But largely it wasn't a great effort. If I did submit it, I got usually traction, and for whatever reason, a number of magazines under certain circumstances had found me. Then I found it wasn't happening as much for a while. And I thought, okay, well, I need to up the ante. And I've hired different PR firms at different times, and they always helped. They've always helped. The problem, not the problem, but the reality about PR is it's expensive to varying degrees, and sometimes prohibitively so. And it's likely to get you results. But the part that I would really advise to whomever is invest in really good, excellent photography of your projects. It's just, you can photograph your projects to the cows come home, but if they're not of a certain level, like as good, and when I say good photography, I mean, I now hire photographers. If I'm going to hire a photographer for a photo shoot, if I haven't already worked for them, the first thing I'm going to do is what look to see where they've been published. Are they in AD? Are they in Lux? Are they in House Beautiful? That if their work is good enough for those magazines prior to me being contacting them, well, that means that if my work is, then when we work together, I have a reasonable chance to expect at least my work will get the attention. May not get selected, but it'll get the attention of those magazines, not just because of the name recognition of the photographer, but because I'm going to get photography that is the quality that's already been accepted by these. And I know the difference now. I mean, I would say I've always worked with good photographers at different levels, but in the last couple of years, I've really stepped up my game in that regard. And frankly, it's very expensive. It's an investment in yourself, but if you just keep putting it out there, so you kind of need great photography. You need a good stylist. I stopped styling my own projects, not because I can't make them look beautiful, but it's a different animal when it's being captured by a photographer who's setting up a frame in a certain way, in a certain angle, a whole bunch of things that I'm happy to not have to hope that it's another, we all have talents, we all have strengths. I might be reasonably good at certain things, but if somebody's much better and they're a better chance, give me a much better chance to have my work taken seriously by magazines, I'm going for that. I'm going to go for that. So you need a great stylist, you need a great photographer. So better to have less, I would say too. Like if and by the way, no matter how good your design is, the photography can make or break it as far as it appears to a magazine, right? So just know that, like, I've learned also, like, I used to I used to delay getting my things photographed because I thought every last thing had to be so perfected, which also means you have to get it approved by the client. And sometimes those final decisions and purchases are hard to come by. Clients get fatigued. They kind of understand, yes, they need a piece of art here, but it seems a little less urgent if I've already moved them in. So I used to be like thinking, well, I can't photograph it until everything is perfected. Well, guess what? You can. But that's where a stylist comes in, and they might bring some props, and they might, you want it to be true to your design, but you also have to leave this little percentage where the creativity of the designer, excuse me, the stylist and the photographer can find something even yet again, and that's really worthwhile. So that's my advice: is do it once, do it right, get good photography, and when you feel you've got a body of really good photography, maybe 2 or 3 projects at least, consider, if you can afford it, because it's an expense, a PR company, because they have the connections. Unless you know that you're going to have your email read by the right person, you can send it, you can get the email, but if you send it off and it's blind, chances are it's not going to be looked at, because you stand in line with all the people who want to be noticed. So good PR person is going to help you in that regard.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, getting a good photographer is always good, just for your own Instagram or your own portfolio as well. I feel I fall into that. I like how you brought up that you wait until something's perfect. And I've done that so many times, and then you get on to the next job and you forget that you didn't take pictures of the last job. You can't just
Mhm.
call a customer up now and like, hey, can I have a photo shoot at your house? Like at 3 months down the road. You want to get it
Right.
done while it's still usually I go in and get pictures when I could get a review from the customer or they get feedback from me. But when you wait too long, it hurts the relationship. It hurts everything.
Yeah, it's true. You want to strike while the iron's hot. You really
Yeah,
do. Well, yeah, there's something exciting. There's a real fresh energy that's present. If you wait too long, it's kind of like the moment's passed a little bit.
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's my focus now, is really document. I've always been good at documenting my projects. I've always photographed more than not if I feel it's worthy. But now I'm really at this level. And that's what I think why you see, and I'm very super grateful for it, that we've, had some features in AD and elsewhere.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to end with you telling everybody where they could follow you, where they could find you on your website, um, just on all social media platforms, so they could check you out.
Sure, happy to. So my website is AS Designs. I always say AS, like Andrew Suvalsky, and Designs as an S at the end. So asdesigns.com. Please check us out there. And then mostly you'll find a steady stream of my work on Instagram, which is Andrew Suvalsky Designs. And that's really the places you'll get the most up-to-date work that we put out there. And we really keep it pretty fresh. So happy to hear from you. And I think that's where we met. And I invite people to check us out and follow, of course, if you like what you see.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you so much for hopping on and taking time out of your schedule today to talk to me on the
Yeah,
podcast.
my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.